You might wonder to yourself, what kind of rights did women in ancient times have? Well, for women in most parts of the world, they didn't have any. Women were seen as inferior objects in many aspects of life when it came to things like politics, having a proper college education, marriage rights, like divorce in places like ancient Greece and anywhere else in the Roman Empire. But there was one other part of the world where that wasn't the case. In ancient Egypt, women were allowed all of these rights and more, which we will talk more about moving forward in this video. They weren't only allowed to be a part of government, but they were also allowed to rule, practice in the medical field, choose to marry who they wanted, and even have a divorce. Here's the black basalt statue of Cleopatra VII. She took over the throne in Egypt as the firstborn child at 17 years old after her father, Ptolemy XII, died in 51 BC. This led to her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, to become extremely outraged for years over the fact that Cleopatra was to be next in line to the throne, which eventually triggered their sibling power rivalry. Despite being known mostly for her charms, she was also a well-educated, talented, and resourceful leader, which were qualities that seem to have attracted the likes of Roman leader Julius Caesar. The two engaged in a love affair, and with that love affair, she was able to convince Caesar to defeat her power rival in the field of battle at which Ptolemy XIII drowned trying to escape in 47 BC, thus keeping Cleopatra's power in Egypt at bay. She was the last known ruler of the 300-year-old Ptolemaic dynasty that ended with her death in 30 BC, and with that she represented a distinct significance and rights for Egyptian women to rule that women in other parts of the world at that time simply did not have. In addition to having the right to rule, women also had the right to a proper education, most notably their right to practice in the field of medicine. Here is an ancient sculpture of the face of Merit Ptah, the very first female physician in the world who was alive somewhere around 2700 BC. What makes her extremely significant is the fact that she was able to set the stage for other women in her time to practice in the same field as she, and eventually for other women all over the world in later generations to come. Female Egyptian physicians were also known as midwife physicians, and they performed surgeries such as childbirth on other women and removing any cancer tissues from inside the body. Meanwhile, in ancient Greece, women were condemned to death for even the simplest practices in medicine until about 400 BC. Coupled with these rights was also the freedom of marriage and divorce. Women typically married between the young ages of 14 and 16 years old, while most men chose to be married in their early 30s. But when it came to whether or not to have a marriage, the choice was completely the woman's decision, and their marriage was to be kept private or without ceremony. It didn't take much for a marriage to become official. All it took was a spoken agreement between man and woman, parental consent from the woman's parents, and the moment the woman walks into her man's home. With them they bring marriage contracts. Here is a marriage contract said to have been drawn up anywhere between 332 and 331 BC, which was during the Ptolemaic dynasty period. According to expert readers in early Egyptian hieroglyphics, this contract contained a list of important belongings such as clothing, jewelry, and utensils. It also states that in the event a wife chooses to leave the house in case of a divorce, these items were promised to be returned back to her. On the other hand, when it came to having a divorce, women in ancient Egypt could leave their husbands for reasons such as mental or physical cruelty or even adultery. This is significant because women in most other parts of the world during that time either had their husbands chosen for them and or did not have the option of forfeiting their marriages until the next millennia. The freedoms that ancient Egyptian women were allowed to have alongside their counterparts eventually set a standard for countries in other parts of the world to do the same today. They're allowed to be leaders, doctors, and happily married wives living happily married lives.